Call to order the May 16th meeting of the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors. Are we directors?
Directors.
Okay, we used to be commissioners, now we're directors. At 7:04, 7:03 p.m. First order of business, public comment? Hearing none. Move to second order of business, consent agenda.
We've added a number of new teacher hires to the consent agenda. All of them are on blue sheets for the board's consideration.
And they came in our email today.
Yeah.
There you go. And some came in their email today.
I'll move.
So I can make a motion.
Yeah, motion to,
I'll move, accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
all those in, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So moving on to the policy number 4, or item number 4, which is first reading of 3 new policies. I know we don't have Steve or Bridget here.
No.
Uh,
So I'm gonna walk it through.
Yes.
Okay. So a couple things. First, before we start policy discussion, something I noticed today going through some of this stuff. In general, I think some of our policies have inconsistent terms, whether or not we're the Montpelier-Roxbury Public Schools or Montpelier-Roxbury School District. I think we'll need to make sure we're consistent as we're adopting these, that we are one or the other. But I don't think, Brian or Grant or somebody else could chip in there on which one is what we need to have in there, but we have been inconsistent so far with whether or not we're Montpelier-Roxbury School District or Montpelier-Roxbury Public Schools in the policies. So,
Okay.
the for us to keep an eye on.
What did we decide in the beginning, that it was Montpelier-Roxbury
Public
Public
schools.
Schools?
Yes, but we're somehow legally required to
Call
be
ourselves.
the Montpelier-Roxbury School District, like in our,
Yeah, and so in like official documents.
in
I
official
think some of the stuff
documents.
Grant's been doing, I feel like I overheard Grant telling somebody that,
Well, Grant and I had a conversation about it at the board retreat.
okay,
Because there is this legal requirement that in some contexts we have to be referred to as the MRSD. But we had a board conversation previously in which, and I think we voted, I think we took an action that we want to call ourselves publicly Montpelier-Roxbury Public
we did.
Schools. So we kind of going with a two-name system.
Yep.
So maybe it is a question for Brian as to whether it matters which name we use in the policy adoption. I doubt it.
It would be good to know the answer to that, though,
Legally,
because,
it would be
yeah,
good to know.
legally it would be good to know. And then whatever that answer is,
We
you know,
put in
if
the
we
policies.
put in the policies. If it doesn't matter, then we call ourselves public schools, because that's what we want to call ourselves. And if we need to go with the school district term, then we do that.
so be it.
And I would say if it matters for some and not for the other, we go with the one that it matters for.
Done and done. Bless you.
Yeah, so it's just a general question I had, but no, everything here under item number 4 they're all required policies. So everything, for the most part, has been presented coming from the VSBA model policies, with the exception of C, but that's first readings.
And give you some context too for C, I had asked, quite candidly with all the work that's been going on, forgotten that I had asked the tech committee to come up with something as one of their goals for this year. And so it just timed out that Mike Martin was able to present that to me just before. And so I'd given Bridget a heads up about that. So what you see for letter C is homegrown from the tech committee here in Montpelier Public Schools.
One thing I noticed about that is under the second section policy, the educational mission, it refers to, I believe, MPS educational mission, and
That needs to
I'm not
change.
sure if
Yep,
it's
we can make that change.
we don't have, I don't know if we
Right.
have one yet.
No, that's
Yeah, we
right,
have one
that's
yet.
right.
We could just have the MPS one as a placeholder
Right.
until we have.
Until it's,
Yeah.
that's,
So I'm going to go down.
Or maybe just even, I was gonna say, suppose you just cut out the words educational mission and said it is the policy of the district to provide robust and reliable ICT resources in order to meet its student, we
You
have to
could just
reword
say,
it.
in order to meet its educational mission,
Mm.
period,
Mhm.
and leave off the specifics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's good.
that's,
Yeah.
the- I think,
that's great.
Can we review these in order, actually? So that
Yeah.
Would be easier.
Student attendance, pupil privacy.
Brian, could you tell me, the second sentence on the student attendance policy
Mhm.
begins legal pupils between the ages of 6 and 16,
Mhm.
define legal how? I don't think we usually refer to the students as legal pupils, so why is that different there?
Let's see if there's a reference to that. I was gonna say it would have to do with residency, but then residency is stated later in the
Later in this.
policy.
Like I said, when I read that, I found it kind of confusing on what classifies a legal pupil. You know, it's not residence, since the rest of the statement declares
Compared to
residence.
the illegal ones?
Like,
Oh, dear.
I wonder if, well,
mm.
I
Yeah, or-
wonder if that's what it's referring to. I can ask.
Yeah, that's really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
That was the only question and comment that I had on that policy. And as a sole policy committee person in attendance tonight, the policy committee, the 3 policies that we're looking at right now, has not gone through. So I can't present anything to you based on feedback from the rest of the committee for these policies, so.
The committee hasn't.
the committee
The
has not
committee
looked at
hasn't
that.
discussed these 3 policies.
And do we know how much latitude we have to make changes other than things like names and references to specific mission? Well, some are allowed to change more than
Yeah,
others.
I think some of that stuff is coming up later. I think Brian had dropped off something here. But I think from what I understand from conversations with Lori in the past, is we can add things to required policies, but we'd be really getting a can of worms if we start taking
Correct.
things out of the
Okay.
required policies.
Especially,
And the VSBA's
right.
work with legal counsel.
Right.
Everything that is in the model policies coming from VSBA should be there for the district to comply with federal and state law. So
That's
adding is
important.
reasonable, tweaking
Mhm.
is reasonable, but pulling things out is gonna
Mhm.
take some legal counsel to verify that it is okay, and
Okay.
likely not.
I don't see anything in the 3 policies I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I don't either.
There's some typos in the pupil privacy rights policy that needed to get fixed up.
Is it not referred to as FERPA anymore? It's now PPRA?
It says reference 20 USC 12. Let's see if we can pull that one up.
I don't know.
I mean, I assume that VSBA would get that right, but just for my information.
I mean, that's how it's listed here from February 2005, Protection of People Rights Amendment. 20 USC 1232H.
And number 1, it says this policy is required by the Federal Protection of Pupil Rights
That's the
Act.
pupil privacy one.
Jim,
Jim, there's a question.
can I ask one?
Jim.
Under the pupil privacy rights, number 6,
Yes.
under what scenario do folks envision collecting or disclosing of, or use of personal information collected from students for the purpose of marketing or selling that information? Why would we ever do that? I mean, I'm not saying no to it, I'm just asking, like, what
Yep.
possible, what would that entail?
I have the same question.
So it is still called the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. I don't know.
Is that like that consent that comes home annually where you
Yes.
sign off whether or not your
Yes.
child can
It's that
be
federal
Mhm.
PPRA.
used in,
Yep.
photograph can be used in
Not called that.
marketing materials?
Correct.
Yeah, I could,
And you say yes or no.
You might just wanna
But what
check
about,
that
are we talking about the
reference.
same question?
Number
This is
6.
first.
Yeah, but
yeah.
So.
what about selling that, I'm talking about selling that information. Who we, why would, what, I'm just, I just am honestly asking for an example of where we would sell student information.
It's like the last policy conversation we had at Roxbury where there was a question as to why there were 4 exemptions to the firearm statute.
Uh-huh.
This is in federal law, literally listed as such. The collection, disclosure, or use of personal information. I mean, this is word for word. Number 6 is word for word. If you look at the footnote on reference number 9.
I understand,
So it's required to be listed in as such.
Yeah.
but couldn't we just say as our policy that we will not be selling the information of students? The district's policy is not to sell information about students.
I think this,
I'm just asking.
Well, you know, this says that these are, that after we've accepted these, you have to write procedures.
I
Our
understand.
procedure could be, we will not sell any information
Well,
to.
Yeah, I mean,
Here's a situation in which that could come up, that they have the kids use, software all the time, right? And a lot of it's like online software, and they're using tons of different programs. And some of those programs do collect their information, like how they perform in this game or whatever.
Okay.
But it wouldn't, but we have to make sure anytime that we're having kids engage in those things, that if it is collecting information from them, it's not collecting their information.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Where would we sell kids'
Identify.
information? I mean,
The question is whether any of those companies potentially make money from the data that they collect on
yeah, a lot
student use
gets,
of their.
sold and packaged these days in odd ways, in unintentional
well,
ways.
you could just imagine that a parent who's watching this or reading this online, then all of a sudden reads that we're selling, that we're acknowledging that we're gonna have to write a regulation that to allow the district to sell information about their kids, and we have to be able to defend that and articulate why it's
I think
important.
we defend it because it's what the federal law tells us.
Exactly.
It tells us we have to allow the selling of.
It doesn't say anything about allowing the
It doesn't
sale.
say
It's
about
just saying that
allowing.
in
We have
case
to-
it happens.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And we could have a policy saying, our policy is we don't allow the selling of kids' information.
Right.
That
Right.
might,
Yeah.
that might get us into a situation where we're not able to use software that teachers want to be able to use.
Okay, well then that's a good justification, just trying to flesh it out that I'm
Yeah.
not just voting on something because
So you
It's
might
just a
also,
footnote.
Peter, look at the, under responsible technology use, if you look at the
The other
second
policy.
page in
Mhm.
another policy. I was reading, 2 and 3 at the bottom, read those two in relation to this, just because
Mhm.
Michelle used that for an example.
Well, we've actually had questions about it from parents, in the past about how, because we use Google Classroom, they want to know what access does Google have to identifying information about their child? And Google Classroom, because it's created for classroom use, is structured so that they don't have access to identifying information. But, Google, right?
Yeah.
Any information that they can get in the process of people using their stuff, they're gonna do stuff with. But we have to make sure that it's not identifying the students.
my last comment, one of the reasons this is coming up as a concern for me is we have a US Secretary of Education who I'm not always convinced is looking out for students, right?
Oh,
Betsy
yeah.
DeVos has done things that I think are
Agreed.
not above
Right.
board. And so just because there's a regulation in the federal law, it doesn't mean we should maybe just check off on it. But thank you for listening, hear me out.
So, I mean, I think we do want to be careful in general though when we deviate from language that's straight out of the statute, because sometimes we might think that we're complying with it or think that we're even strengthening it, but, it can confuse future boards. It can also perhaps unintentionally put us out of compliance if we don't do it right.
At least with the required policies.
Yeah.
If there are other recommended ones that this board chooses to take on, or certainly if there are policies that this board wants to consider that are not required, I think that's where you have a lot of room for flexibility and tailoring. But I think your point is well taken.
So maybe this is one, it's an interesting thing now that we're a new district. What will be the process for procedures? It's not generally something, you know, the administration does procedures, the board doesn't do procedures. But maybe, I'm thinking of what Peter asked, so maybe we need to ask to see the procedures for things we're worried about that would be handled in procedures.
But I think we certainly need to flag them and ask questions. I think we should maybe be selective about it though, because if we get
Right, that's what I
stacks
mean,
like
we
this,
don't
we're not
normally
gonna-
see
yeah.
all the procedures, but maybe it's worth, if it's something we're worried about, worth
yeah.
checking out.
Yeah, and the procedure on number 6 can be that we're just not gonna do it.
Yeah.
Sure. Right, and the easy one then, before we get off of this policy, number 3 needs to be reworded to be correct. Arrangements of protect student privacy is
To
not
protect, yeah.
appropriate. Minor details there.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
So process-wise, this is going to come in and then come back to it?
It will, yes. It has to anyway. I mean, this is only the first reading. And I'm curious, maybe again for a consistency question. So this policy only referred to parents, not guardians most of the time, if I remember correctly in the reading. Is that consistent with most of the policies, that language regarding parents, guardians? Did anybody else catch that? Did it read?
Yeah, no, I'm catching it too.
Yeah.
Also, there's, under all statutes, do parents and guardians have the same rights?
Yeah, 'cause I know, like, number 4 is one that caught my attention, the right of a parent to inspect any instructional material.
That's
Not all
number 1
parents.
as well, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, educational records says parents, guardians.
Yeah. I think we should have parents, guardians to the extent possible, unless there's a legal reason not to do it.
So I'm not sure, I'm not the lawyer there, but it caught my attention. It seemed like we were using it a little bit differently than we normally do.
Well, alcohol and drugs just says parents, doesn't say guardians.
Well,
Okay.
then it sounds like we need to add guardian.
The answer to that question about if the guardian have the same rights as a parent, they don't have the same rights, but
For these purposes.
for these
they
purposes,
might.
maybe we wish to give them those rights.
Mhm.
Well, and can we?
I
Yeah, I don't know.
don't know.
That's all about.
That goes in your question category, please.
So I'm gonna answer a question I should know the answer to, but in terms of second reading, how much change can occur in the policy committee between the first and second reading before we need to give it a first reading again before it becomes?
So all the first reading is a list that this is the first time it's been out.
Yeah.
If there are no changes, it can be warned for adoption at the next meeting. As many readings as you want to get
You
it
can
right.
keep changing it
So
forever.
each reading is a change?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But as soon, because we talked about the number, right, is this correct? As soon as we didn't make any changes, then we could adopt the policy.
Correct. There's no required number of readings.
Right.
There's just, it be read and be warned for adoption 10 days in advance of the warning.
All right, are we on to responsible computer use.
You ready for,
I think so, 'cause I don't have any more comments or things that I noticed in the privacy policy.
so yes, we are.
Thank you.
So, I don't have, this one, I'll be honest, caught me a little bit off guard this morning when I was reading it. It's different from the VSBA model policy. I think the content is all the same, but the structure has changed some. It's quite a bit different than the policy Montpelier had in the books already, and I unfortunately didn't correctly track down ours for Roxbury WSSU to compare it. But Mike Martin and the admin team, I'm not sure who else was involved in the first vetting of this policy and made some changes. I'm assuming everything is okay, but I don't have anything to report back on why or what or how it compares to the model policy straight from VSBA.
So the model policy is essentially a lot of do not, do not, do not, and so this was written in an attempt to express what we hope they would do. So
Shifting the language from.
essentially trying to shift the language to be more, this is how we expect that you're going to use our technology
The
responsibly.
usual policy governance, no.
Right.
Okay. As I said, I didn't really have time to go through in detail both of the policies, the VSBA and this one, but it seemed like the content was all the same, but it was different.
And who did most of the drafting of this?
Mike
Was it
Martin
Mike?
and the technology committee, which
Okay.
includes representatives from all three buildings. Teachers, tech support specialists, library, tech
Yeah,
integrationists.
that's what I remember him mentioning, that they wanted to cast it in a positive light.
Mhm.
Any further questions about responsible technologies? Any further discussion on any of the policies up for first reading?
So I'll make sure that all three of these are on for our second reading for the next time we all get together.
Excellent. So moving on to item number 5, the second reading of 5 policies, tobacco prohibition, education records, student alcohol and drugs, limited English proficiency students, and firearms. Do you want to go through them one by one with discussion, or
So do I make a motion?
Todd?
Do we need, they're not adopting these, we need a motion to discuss? Or
They're up for discussion.
No, for discussion,
So-
yeah.
Right.
there's no motion yet?
Yes.
I think I'd ask this question at the first reading for tobacco prohibition, is whether or not this applied to marijuana.
It did not apply to
Yeah, it does-
marijuana.
It does not.
It does not.
So that would fall under the student alcohol and drugs policy.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yes.
clarify that
No,
in
that's a
my
good,
head.
that's good clarification.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
good,
Is,
thank you.
is there any needed or planned change when marijuana becomes legal? My guess is no, because it's
Sorry about that.
just not, well,
Not
maybe.
For minors.
It's not-
It's
it's
18
not legal
year-old
for
seniors.
minors, but
Still.
it's.
We do
it's-
have 18-year-old, and we have teachers
Oh, but
on
is
the
it maybe
grounds as
21?
well.
Huh? Yeah.
We have teachers on the grounds.
As far as I understand it, there's still no legal protection for having a controlled substance on school property.
Right,
And
okay.
control.
As, unless it's under, you're taking medication.
No.
But,
As, and I have not read it, but it's, as I recall, the allowance for marijuana refers to one's personal residence. And so absent more information to the contrary, it is still not going to be legal whether you are, certainly you are not going to be legal as a student. And I would be incredibly surprised if you could legally, as an adult, bring that onto a school campus.
Okay.
What
And
about?
this policy specifically talks about students, not adults, so in that case, it's illegal.
We have a separate policy, drug and alcohol
For
in the
teachers.
workplace for staff.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that.
So, I'm just gonna go one by one and see if people have comment. Any discussion on tobacco prohibition beyond Becky's?
Why ubiquitous?
Education records?
I'm just gonna say, if we don't have any comment, then next time it can be under adoption of policies, correct?
Yes, in
Right.
consent agenda.
We just wanna
Yeah.
be clear.
Yeah, no,
about
that's, I'm
So-
keeping track.
All right, so that can go to adoption.
No worries. Education records,
I'm good with that.
great.
To adoption.
Student alcohol and drugs. Limited proficiency students. And firearms.
Firearms is where we had all the discussion at the last one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then we partially resolved that with
Mhm.
the statutory requirements. Great, so we move on to 6, we don't have any,
So
Um,
we'll
well,
be
there's-
up- we'll
this
be
isn't
warned
sub-
for adoption.
yeah,
This isn't substantive, but there's still shall in the firearms one, and I'm not sure. And the policy implementation section.
Oh, under
Inste-
expelled, shall be expelled?
And then the superintendent shall refer to, and then on the back, the superintendent shall. We're changing all that to will, is that correct?
I believe we are using will instead of shall, unless,
Honestly, I don't know. what to do.
is that a statutory cut and paste? They have the same meaning.
Fine with that.
Bridget raised that question last time, didn't she?
Yeah, I think so.
And she's not here tonight to have that rationale, I don't know.
It's the same meaning then.
But
Well, I mean, is there any harm in pushing it back another meeting just to make sure we have the correct answer?
No?
Yeah.
that's all for that. Remind me, this policy wouldn't preclude the district from having a shooting club or activities off campus,
This is on campus.
right? It's all on
Mhm.
campus.
So,
Oh, there's a good question.
Well, campus is usually considered though to mean any
Wherever
school
the student-
activity.
Where the school
yeah.
goes.
so
But
it
this
might.
does say, for example, any student who brings a firearm to school and who possesses a firearm at school.
Right, the theme is definitely on school, but I had wondered, like I think about the school that I grew up in, we had shooting sports clubs that we would leave campus and go after school hours. And I wasn't sure if that would change or be allowed with this policy.
Well, we do, our Nordic team, I think, participated in some,
Biathlon.
biathlon
Biathlons.
stuff
Mhm.
this winter.
Maybe while we're checking out legal things, we could check out that,
Yeah,
just to find out.
So,
no, that's a good question, because if you define campus broadly like that,
anything that's
I think
happening
we
related to the
usually
school.
do.
yeah, well, and possess,
Reliable.
you know, possess arguably means that they're, have one in their, yeah. Even if they didn't bring it, and even if it was provided to them as part of an activity.
Yeah, we might wanna just have a section that says if they're participating in a school-sponsored event that includes firearms.
Can I put you on the spot, Lori? This has to be almost identical to Northfield's policy right now for firearms, right? And they're able to participate in that
Rifle
rifle
club.
team.
Then there's ROTC.
They do. So there is some flexibility, or it's,
Or people
Right.
have never asked that.
Well, I guess the
question.
question is like, is there flexibility or people just not?
following.
Not even-
Yeah, I mean, I would have the type of thing where if someone said, you know, we wanna shut down the
That's what-
biathlon
That's the
team,
question, yeah.
Right.
none of these students can have guns. They
We should
might have a
probably
pretty
put
good
something in
argument
there,
that,
yeah.
that they could.
So, yeah, well, shalls, wills, and
And,
clubs off physical campus,
yeah,
Yeah.
well, maybe even not, I mean,
I would, maybe not even clubs, just
just activity.
Activity.
Yeah.
approved, board-approved activities. Would it have to be board-approved?
Well, I
Do
hope
we,
not.
do we
because-
approve activities?
No.
No, you don't.
Okay, so what,
We-
how is
School
how does it get
sponsored, I would
approved?
say.
Is
School
school sponsored and
sponsored.
appropriately,
School sponsored,
and
okay,
appropriately
that'd be good.
supervised or
School
something?
sponsored.
School sponsored?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if there is a club or a sport, they're required to have an adult,
Moderator?
Yeah.
So if I heard this correctly, tobacco prohibition, education records, student alcohol and drugs, and limited English proficiency students will be warned for adoption
Yes.
on June 6th.
Yep.
We'll add firearms as a third reading, along with the second reading for student attendance, pupil privacy, and responsible computer, internet, and network use.
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay. We are squared away there.
A few questions.
Thank you all.
Excellent, so we are basically out of schedule. Item 6, update on superintendent search. That would be Tina and Lisa. I guess Tina is actually officially part of your board, for your search committee chair duties, isn't it, to report out? Although,
It is.
Lisa, please feel free to.
Absolutely. Check on me. My report is we have a great search committee. It's taking a lot of time and energy on everybody's part, so we really appreciate the search committee. We added another interview day. The interviews will happen on the 21st and the 22nd. And I
Do we
thought,
need to approve the extra interview day?
I don't know.
Should we just, for
Sure, I'm game.
belts and suspenders? Okay, because then we had to approve
warning you.
the. Huh?
It needs to be warned, but do we have to do any approval?
Because we had to approve moving it from 12 to 13 and some other change.
And we did
That was
originally
because
approve the
it-
dates.
Huh?
I think we did originally approve the meeting
Yeah.
dates.
Let's do it, just to do it, make sure that. So is that an indication that we have candidates that we like?
It's an indication that we have a lot of people to look at.
Okay, good, well, that's better than,
A lot of people made it through the screening tool.
yes.
So while you're talking about approvals, we have 2 sets of minutes, which Lisa nicely,
3 sets, I
Three
believe.
oh, you're right, 3 sets of minutes that need board approval.
Okay,
And.
There's not much to them
Right,
because most of our time is spent in executive session.
right. There. And, speaking of,
can
maybe
we,
warning, go ahead.
I was gonna say, can we approve the meetings since they weren't?
No.
Uh,
They would have to be, who has those minutes?
We all have.
Heather brought copies for everybody tonight.
If the search committee is approving them as you go, does the board need to approve them as well?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, you, right.
Right.
Committee can approve its own minutes?
Right, because the committee has a charge to operate
You've-
as
you've
the
told them to
entity,
do
so,
this, right.
yeah.
Oh, great, great.
Okay, thank you. So, I thought I'd review, since we are having a few extra board meetings, that we would, clarify when those were. So Tuesday, May 22nd, we're meeting.
Are we?
Lisa and I have down that we talked about it and we were meeting to plan for the June 4th visits by candidates.
And Mike, I think
And
that
I-
was something
I have
Mike
that.
introduced at the meeting when he
Yeah.
came and presented
I
to
think
us.
So I had that written down.
That a
too.
number of school board folks
However,
weren't at
what is
There's a
from.
high school concert that evening.
I know, we talked about it, there are people on this committee on the high school concert.
7 o'clock on the 22nd, the logistics for.
Yeah.
So the,
4th.
And that was on a
I,
Tuesday night?
it occurred to me that I think it was Bridget last time that was saying, could we please clarify when we're having meetings? And this did not come up, I don't think.
Yeah,
Oh.
if the 22nd meeting came up, this has escaped me, but I would, it makes sense.
Well, I guess I'm saying, if not on the 22nd, when would you do it before June 4th? I don't know if we can.
And the other thing about that is we talked with Mike, and he can be there that
We can be
night.
there on the
And
22nd.
he said that the screening committee will actually have a general outline for us for
Okay.
what the 4th would look like.
We're deeming
and
that
so-
it's very short meeting. But
Yes, we expect to be relatively short, but and that we wouldn't necessarily be doing all of the legwork, just that we would be kind of taking a look and maybe delegating different
Yeah.
folks to be different places and figuring out when the interviews can happen.
And the idea on the 22nd being that the screening committee would be there and you could just kind of flow one to the other? Or was-
Oh, well, on the 22nd, we're meeting all day, so.
Well, it
But-
doesn't have to be that day that the board meets.
Right, but the
It could be
board,
the
as a
next
matter of
day.
fact, we discussed we had to be done by 7 o'clock if the board was meeting, because that was our
Yeah.
understanding. But it would have to be done sometime to be ready for June 4th. So what's the board's pleasure,
I'm good with the calendar for the 22nd.
I guess? Pardon?
I'm good with the 22nd.
I'm good with the 22nd, I could do the 23rd as well, that week is actually pretty good for me, the following week, less good.
It's, as Michelle pointed out, that's a deadly week for any parent of a child. Not only is it the high school concert, the next day's the art show, which you just got a little card
Yes.
for.
Which is happening at 17? No,
It's too
happening-
bad. I guess
6:30.
we don't know yet how late it'll actually be necessary for us to go. Because would it help if it's a very short meeting to make it early?
It doesn't work for me scheduling.
I'm not sure we can because of our interviews.
Well, that's what I was saying. We don't know exactly what's happening. but-
Right. What time is the concert?
I'm just trying to find that out. I have it in my calendar at 6 o'clock, but I don't know that that's real.
Uh-huh.
I have it written down, but no.
But no time.
7 o'clock.
7.
And the art show is at 6:30.
Yeah, on Wednesday. We could meet at 5:30 or 6 on Wednesday and we still make the art show.
I'm not sure where, if this whole building will be.
No,
Sort
it's,
of
No,
it's
it's
in the gym.
Oh, it's not,
Yeah.
okay.
It's
Didn't
quite
look
the
closely
show, you
enough.
should come.
So we could use this space.
Yes.
And then go see the
Well,
art show.
the question would be, we could ask Mike if he could come, or he could get us ready so Lisa and I could do it.
Right.
So, and I guess Mike's preference would probably the 22nd too, so he doesn't have to make an extra trip.
Somehow, I thought that came out in the discussion and the board picked it, but I can't imagine why we would.
We did
It
on
went
that first
The very
night
first meeting
when
over spring break.
a couple people were
When
absent.
we didn't know anything was happening.
Mhm.
Yes. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Well, maybe we should check with availability of people. If we did it on Wednesday before the art show, how does that strike the rest of the people on board?
What time are we setting? 5?
I'd
6.
5:30?
5:30, it won't take that long, will it?
I think, Tina, I remember we were talking with Mike and he said something about not expecting it to be too short either. Do you know what I mean? So I think maybe an hour is probably a good
He was
cushion.
thinking about your discussion of what we'll have to say and how long you would discuss it, I think. So if it was 5:30,
Make something happen.
that's an hour.
Hopefully it wouldn't take more than an hour. I mean,
Well,
it took a
and you don't have
little
to get
more.
to the art show the minute that it starts.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna
Right.
say, it would do a little
It's
more
not
than
like
an
a
hour.
It's
concert.
flexible.
That's a good point. So, actually, if I'm thinking, Ryan, how about 6 instead of 5? Is that better? Not much.
Necessarily, it's gonna be some shuffling of the schedule, and there's a chance kids will be in tow, but figure something out.
They'll like the art
They
show.
like
Yeah.
the show.
It's just, it's dinner time.
Because Michelle's
It's
right,
bedtime.
the art show is not like a concert
right.
to
It's a-
sit at.
Although there is a concert during the art show.
That is true, but it's unlikely it will be at 6:30.
Yeah.
So we're gonna check with Mike for the Wednesday, confirm that he can come, and then move forward with that? Is that
Well,
what we're saying?
I think it's the pleasure of the board, because I'm betting we will have what we're doing done with by then, so probably if he can't come, Lisa and I can
Not a big
present it.
deal.
Is that your thought?
Yeah, sure. Can anyone not attend on Wednesday?
Could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't, Bridge is gonna be back in town, right? I don't know if, I don't think Steve is gonna be back in town.
He's told me he's out of town for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
And it's, so,
So it won't
He'll be
matter
at-
which of those days he's not gonna be.
yeah.
though I can't say for sure though, because I'm not sure when he actually left.
It depends whether this is week 1 or week 2.
Right, I actually don't know which one
It's
he
week
left,
one,
so,
he was at the farmer's market on Saturday, so.
so it's not gonna be here regardless.
Yeah. I'm good with the 23rd at 6.
Yep, it's okay.
23rd at 6.
The spring concert was that Tuesday, not Wednesday, by the way, Michelle.
Right, but we began by discussing Tuesday, that's why it came
Oh,
up.
sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
And the jazz band plays during the art show.
Ah, sorry. Yeah.
It's not exactly a concert, but it's live music.
It's
Mhm.
and it's
And very nice.
Yeah.
So that we're clear, so that's a board meeting on the 23rd, and then there'll be a board meeting on, June 4th.
Yeah, and then
Right,
figure out
we have that.
how exactly is that envisioned to work? That's gonna be the
Well,
Yeah.
that's
kind of,
what we're talking about on the 23rd.
yeah, that's gonna be
Yeah,
the,
but
can we get a,
the other issue
A trailer?
is that, sure, to some degree you can. The candidates would be here probably for the day.
yeah,
And culminating in them talking with you, and if there were a couple of them, you'd be here a while. And it's the only thing on the agenda for that.
yeah.
Aren't we supposed to have 3?
Up to 3.
Up to 3.
Mhm. So, I think Mike said that it's likely that each candidate that the screening committee names or finalist would have a liaison who would take them to every school that day. It's not necessarily a board member, though. I think he said
No,
it could be
Yeah, somebody from the
somebody.
screening committee.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that would happen prior to coming to the board, so the board
Right.
does not directly deal with
So
And there
that
would be
kinda
some
happens during the day,
community.
and then the board convenes at night and
that. And
meets with.
how long that would take depends on
I feel like I'm
how
in a
many
tennis
candidates
match.
there are.
Well, and we talked also about having a robust opportunity for public engagement with the candidates, with the
Yes.
finalists. And so there's a question as to whether that would happen prior to the board meeting, like would we have a public forum prior to the board meeting, or would that happen as part of the
We
board meeting?
discussed putting some of that during the day, so that
Okay.
there would be opportunities for the community to meet the candidates during the day. We could also build in, just prior to the board meeting, something, but also the board meeting's open, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I
And
was just wondering whether we wanted to create a special time for that and promote it.
Well, I think
Kind of
it was our
plan on
intention to
23rd.
promote the ones during the day. I think it's your call on whether you feel if we had one or two during the day, would you also want one falling more in the evening?
yes.
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
So.
Or at least,
let-
at least we could kind of, wrap it into what we're doing. Maybe have, when we talk to the candidates, have part of that time for a little back and forth with whoever shows up.
I guess I would say to you,
It's gonna be long.
well, it could be. So,
Yes.
if the community's here and gonna ask questions and the board's going to ask questions, do you wanna separate that
Yeah,
in
I would
some
think
way?
so. I would have the board part and then potential 2 minutes for interaction with the community members.
Oh, and we have done a thing before where we ask the public to write their question on an index card and give them.
Oh, we could do that.
And then the board can ask those questions.
That might be good for that part, especially if they have time during the day when they can ask questions
Yeah.
directly. And
How about if we, report this back to Mike, and he might have suggestions too of a good way to do it.
Yep.
yeah, that would be great. And did he discuss at all how the community forums would look? Would all candidates be in a room together so people could come for an hour and hear the different answers, or would
Probably
it be
the candidates would be separated.
separate? So if someone wanted to hear from all of them, they'd have to.
I think he
they'd have to
offered
be
up
in for the long haul.
either of those.
Yeah,
That sometimes it's done where
separately.
the candidates are all in the same big room and community, teachers, students can all be there and go from one to the next during a period of an hour or something like that. And that sometimes it's done where they're separate times and separate times, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause,
I guess I've never
Seems
seen it done all
logistically-
together, but it doesn't mean it couldn't be.
yeah, I mean, from the candidate's perspective, they probably would not want to be all together, but from the public's perspective,
It's convenient.
Right.
it's a lot more convenient.
Right.
And then you get some people who saw one person but not the other two, and I know they wouldn't love it, but
Yeah, that would certainly seem uncomfortable for candidates.
yeah. Ask Mike.
Let's ask Mike, how he feels it's best, knowing he is aware that we're very concerned about the community being able to give input into
Yeah.
this. And we have discussed it, so,
Or we could do a thing where we're pretty disciplined about, it's gonna be an hour and one person's gonna go in for 20 minutes and then you take the cane and 20 minutes and then, and really have like, so you can see all three in an hour and it'll be a dependable hour, but
I
they
think
won't
that's
be all
unrealistic.
sitting there together.
I wouldn't recommend a 20-minute conversation.
No.
I think
She's
you're,
too short.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
I
Way
think
too
you're
short.
gonna want more than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
I mean, you
well,
could,
that's what concerned me
Well-
about doing both public and board questions.
Yeah.
If the board has a good number of questions, and then you open it to the community, that's not because I wanna cut off the community, I'm just thinking of the length of time, so you might wanna separate that the community gets to talk to them and the board, so then the other thing to think about, and we've been asked to
Yeah.
think about it, is how would you get feedback back from the community once they have talked?
Well, they're always welcome to call or email us.
Yeah,
But
well,
it'll
we
be
could
that
encourage them to
day.
call
But
email,
we're
we could also
moderating.
encourage them to,
Oh, do
Right.
we have to make the
Decision.
decision that night?
You don't have to.
Right, out of
well,
the two.
going back to my 20-minute suggestion, I wasn't saying that would be the only opportunity, but I'm saying maybe have each candidate has an hour, so people who really wanna, dig in, but then have a session where, for people who don't have 3 hours to spend and wanna see all 3 candidates, there's gonna be kind of like a quick, 20 minutes each, you can see them all, and then they'll each have a separate community meeting too,
You know,
that'll be
something
longer.
that I haven't thought of is I wonder if there's a way of videoing. A lot of people watch the board meetings on Orca. Maybe there's a way of videoing each of them in some specific thing and running it prior to that also. I don't know. How about
No.
the search committee will talk about and get back with
Yeah,
you?
definitely.
With a plan that, and that's what we're talking about
Well, and
on the 23rd.
Yeah, I think we do wanna make the decision as quickly as possible, because we do need to hire someone and have them start just minutes later. You know?
Yes.
Right, but the 23rd is next week.
Yes.
You're talking about the hiring decision?
Yeah, I'm talking about
Yeah.
the hiring decision.
Well, you can hire that
Right.
night.
Right,
Yes.
but if I was starting down the road of envisioning a process in which we hear from everybody, the community gets to ask questions, we tell community members, hey, watch the recording on Orca 3 days from now, give us your feedback, we're gonna make
No.
this decision.
This has been so quick already
Yeah.
that can't happen. So
No, it's not gonna happen. That's
the
not gonna
fact
happen.
of the 23rd, then you have a week and a half between
Right.
there and when the candidates come.
Right, so we should really be prepared to have a system which produces a superintendent on the 4th. Which means if we're going to get feedback from the community, we need to set up a way of doing that.
Well, I wonder if we could have, like,
Becky?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm concerned that it's going to get unstructured and unwieldy very quickly. In group hiring processes, it helps if you have a list of, say, 5 questions from which you'll choose 3,
Yes.
so that you have a fair understanding and equitable treatment of the candidates. And you can do that on the public forum as well. Have the people that are coming forward from the public also be able to choose, say, from a list of 5 questions within which 3 people can ask the question, or however it is. Otherwise, you're really not going to have an equitable interviewing process.
Right. Can I follow up a little bit on that, thinking, we're talking about the community in very broad terms,
Yeah.
but how likely are we to get the whole community to show up that night?
And we'll have
It's
a
not
lot
very
of
likely.
Well,
We're
we'll
gonna
have-
get,
We'll have a lot of people.
Yeah,
But-
we'll have-
is it a general representation of the community, or is it a subset of the community?
It's
So
parents.
so
Yeah.
Yeah.
the concern is that we'll have a bunch of folks on the one end of the spectrum, one way or the other, show
Mhm.
up. And if that's all the feedback we get from the community, it's not gonna be that helpful overall for us to make an informed decision.
It is still our decision to
Yeah.
make, and I
Absolutely.
think we,
Is our
But thinking
decision,
about this conversation
as a-
about what
Mhm.
we're expecting from the community,
right.
it's like we have to be realistic about what we're setting up in terms of what we're gonna get for feedback, if anything, and whether or not it's actually gonna be useful in terms of informing us as a board on the community overall.
Yeah, Lisa?
Mike did mention some kind of system for community feedback prior to when the board interviews the
Yes.
candidates.
Okay.
So,
He's got it.
I think there's something more specific that we will bring on the 23rd about that, and I think,
Maybe even send it out before, so that we know what it looks like.
yeah, if,
That would be helpful.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think the issue is, you wouldn't want to ask people to come and then not ask them what they thought, no matter who
Yeah.
they were that came.
Right.
And that was
Exactly.
what we were trying to figure out, is they're
Right.
coming,
How do we
How do
get-
we
how do we
incorporate
get
that?
back that,
Yep.
no,
And I think
no matter
that's-
what the representation.
That's
Right, and we
fair.
have
And I
community
think
members
Mike-
on the search committee and,
Right. And I think, I feel confident that on the 23rd, we'll come back with some sort of a wondrous plan.
Good.
Good.
What do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
That would be
Sounds great.
helpful.
Yeah.
In that end, and my next thing on my list is where Becky was going, I would like the people on the board to think about a question they would like to ask during this interview process, and please send them to me,
Okay.
so that I could incorporate them in, so that we're fairly structured when we ask our questions during the interview.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing, kind of question to bring to Mike, community feedback, how do we get that? How do we structure the community engagement so it's both, so people feel that they have adequate time with the candidates, but we also don't leave people in a position where, they have to take 3.5, 4 hours out of the day to feel that they got to see all, assuming we have three candidates. And then an orderly, fair process for questioning, which I think is, and I think, Becky, that's gonna be a little bit, I think for us, that's gonna be easy to achieve. I think telling the public what they can and cannot ask is not gonna go over well.
I just don't know how to have an equitable interviewing process without some sort of,
Yeah.
I hope Mike, I'm sure Mike's done this before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll have
So
some
I think they'll have a
recommendations on
plan
that.
for how to manage the
Mhm.
community
Yeah.
input.
Yep.
But remember, there are
That'd be
people
good.
who are gonna wanna ask their own questions in this community, so.
That is-
Especially this community,
Yes.
that's right.
And they're not interviewing the people.
No, it's
Yeah.
feedback,
It's
it's
not-
community,
so-
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
But
caveat. But
they would,
That's true.
I think what we would have to do is probably the index card thing, so that it's the board that's managing the questions. And we would
Yeah.
have to give all of the finalists the opportunity to answer each question.
Yeah.
And that's what would make it equitable, so that we don't have individuals from the public addressing specific questions to specific candidates. But here we have a question from the public, could each of you please respond?
That's a
Well,
good idea.
and
That's
in all
assuming they're
fairness,
all three here.
there may be different questions we're gonna wanna ask different candidates, like,
Depending upon their background.
again, in the background, if we have an
Experience.
out-of-state candidate, there might be a question about, what do you know about Vermont, and why do you wanna move
Do you know what
here?
you're getting into?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sure,
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
okay. Sounds like you've covered that ground well, thank you.
yeah, and thank you, both of you, for doing this. I know it's a big time commitment. And we appreciate it greatly.
I can say I think we're very impressed with the person you hired to do the search.
To Mike? Yes.
Mike's doing a good job. Good,
Excellent.
good to know.
So moving on to item 7, which I think we may have to, unfortunately, neither Bridget nor Steve are here, and they have been working on pretty major aspects of this, so.
It's funny, Jim, I had emailed Bridget about 10 o'clock this morning.
I know,
So I
just
missed the last policy committee
dreaming
meeting because I
about
was
it.
in interviews for the CNT
Yeah.
director position, on which they were discussing those two items.
Oh.
And it's like, well, what's the plan tonight? They weren't in the packet. Are you bringing handouts? You're planning on presenting something? How was the structure for this discussion? So I actually don't know. She didn't get back to me, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
the
Steve's
goal
indication was we should punt on a lot of this. I know we've done this previously. I do kind of want to set up, I think, what we need to do. And obviously, this is a big piece. I think this would be our biggest piece if we didn't have other pieces that we're also focusing on.
Mhm.
We're getting those other ones squared away quickly, so.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to use a little time to remind people, about the day we spent with Steve Dale, and kind of, I think, where we need to go and to, go starting this summer. Mission and vision and ends, and that's another community process. So I think early on, and I think we can work with the new superintendent on this, get a public process, engagement process, to get those two things going. And then we could go about, I think it would be good to have a series of discussions about board governance and board structure and board decorum, et cetera. maybe to either build that into some of our meetings over the summer, where we just kind of, take part of a meeting and do a topic. We might wanna consider getting some sort of a facilitator, to help with that. And just, iron out the 3 or 4 things we need to go through and really make that kind of our summer project, and maybe wrap it up with a retreat in August where we finalize a lot of the work and get those pieces in place, going into the 2019 or 2018-2019 school year. So that's kind of my overall thought. I think we need to probably really set that timetable, either like the 7th or the 20th of June. And it might be a really good thing to be ready to pounce on after, the 4th or 5th, when we make a new hire and really bring the new superintendent into that process. So that's kind of my high level thought on that. Given that we can't talk about some of these items that are in Steve and Bridget's head, and we'll need to talk about later. So I don't know if you.
I like the idea of having devoted time again to really knock through this stuff and get it taken care of. But I'm a little bit concerned pushing it off all the way into the summer, because we're talking about the budgeting policy, annual planning policy. We'll be we're not talking about this until August, maybe getting it confirmed and voted on in September. We're into the budget cycle already.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're gonna have to prioritize and hopefully get. I think the 2 top items here are probably things we should try to wrap up in June or early July if we can, and then we can work on some other things, like really refining what our governance structure looks like. What governance by policy instead of policy governance means.
Right.
Things like, board decorum, et cetera. Another big piece we're gonna talk about next is superintendent evaluation process. I think that's, budget process, superintendent evaluation process, and annual, just our annual planning, are things we really need to.
Our powers, school board members.
Those are our responsibilities.
Yeah, need to get moving on soon. And the mission and ends, but I think that's something we can
Build in once
Build
we're
in,
kind of
yeah.
running with the new SI,
So, we're not gonna talk about these policies now, right? Is what you're saying?
yes, because we just can't have a meaningful discussion
Okay.
without.
I missed the last round of drafts. The annual planning policy, I can just give you a rough update. It's still pretty rough. I think we were really hoping to have a broad discussion before Steve spent any more time on that one, just because it could go a bunch of different directions. The budget policy has been, I think, a little bit more refined. It's gone through a couple of drafts. It's had some feedback from administrators. So the budget policy draft is probably in a much more better position to have a meaningful conversation rather than the annual planning policy. But again, I wasn't at the last planning committee, the policy committee, so I can't speak with exactly what Steve and Bridget had said, so.
May I ask you a question about the budgeting policy?
What's that?
You've got the action of the board will be to approve an overall percent change in the district's education spending. Education spending is defined as the total budget less local revenues. My question about this policy, I was just asking this so you could talk about it, was in the process, where is that? And the reason I'm asking is I often feel like
It's
So is this the,
it's the next page after the code of conduct, it's stapled in with it.
so the budget policy did get in,
Yeah.
okay. I had a question about that too, so I'm not I have it,
Okay.
yes.
I was going
I
to.
don't know how Steve.
I'll
right.
just express that, I've always found it hard to give anybody,
The
Facts.
a percentage or anything
Right.
until I know what you need. So if I'm not opposed to doing that, but if the you had a whole bunch of, a list of things that would happen, if that happened ahead of time, and then you said to the board, given these factors, what do you think?
Yeah.
I'd be better able to do that.
Right, because technically the board approves a dollar amount budget.
Right.
In the
We
end.
make, in the end, we
Right.
make that
Yeah.
motion. Yeah, so I had made, the last draft that I had seen on this, I had made that same note to ask Steve, and
Okay.
so I'm not sure how they fleshed that out
You
or,
can put it
right,
on
but,
your agenda, thanks.
yes.
It would be great to have a timeline in this policy
Yes.
also.
So I think that's gonna, that goes into the annual planning
In the
policy also.
planning
So
policy.
there's
Okay.
some overlap between the two,
Yeah.
and it's been discussed and kind of how to make those
How to
not be
line- how to
redundant
take the line
and,
out,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely to make sure that essentially the board input can be received in a timely fashion, so it's not,
Right.
here's the proposed budget now.
We really, the board would really benefit from procedures. I know this is a policy, but I think we would really benefit from procedures.
And a timeline would help us.
Deadlines
Yeah.
attached. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I also agree we need that well before September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're already
We're already
midway through
glancing
May,
along.
yes. So are we, ready to move on to 8? So, one of the most important things I think the board function is superintendent evaluation, and I know we've had somewhat of a, at least the Montpelier school board has had, kind of an up and down history with that, just in terms of actually having a process in place, and my understanding is somebody is actually really doing it much at all. I think it's really important we have a clear and consistent and effective superintendent evaluation process that starts with the new superintendent, that perhaps we can, at least at the initial stages, help the new superintendent build. But kind of the major things that I have on my list for, well, here's some thoughts I have on that. One, I think we need an evaluation committee that's tasked with putting a timetable together, making sure the evaluation happens, making sure all the pieces come together, and just getting that going. So that means a committee and then a set process for that committee to follow.
Again, procedures with timeline.
Procedures
Yes,
with
actually, that's
timelines.
necessary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think part of that is a process that would involve the whole board plus the superintendent of setting goals. That the superintendent would set goals, the board would also set goals for the superintendent. There would come, there would be a coming together and agreement of what those goals actually are. So there's common agreed upon goals between the board and the superintendent about what the goals for the year are.
Mhm.
And that would then be evaluated with some things I think we need to put together pretty soon, which is a job description. So just kind of, what are the basic expectations? There's the yearly goals of the superintendent, but then just as a base level function, what do we expect of the superintendent just in terms of doing her or his job?
Essential functions.
Essential functions. And then also, that can also, for the new superintendent, I think that should be married to an entry plan, which is something we should also get together. And, part of that would also be in the contract. What are they contractually obligated to do? What's their job description tell them to do? And then for the initial first year, what's the entry plan? And then beyond that, it would be the goals. So just get clear expectations about what we're measuring, what we expect. Make sure those are up front. And then as the year progresses, I'd like a pretty aggressive review process, or at least thorough.
Mhm.
Aggressive is the wrong word, but thorough and comprehensive review process. That the evaluation committee would be in charge of moving along, but obviously the board would be informed along the way. And kind of, the three main pieces that I would love to see as kind of part of like a 360 review are, I think there should be 1 or 2 opportunities during the year where the evaluation committee meets one-on-one, and I've done this in nonprofit boards, it's very effective, with the leadership team and just gets feedback on
Yeah.
how things are going. And I think that does a couple things. It gives the board a lot of information, and it, you know, the board is hearing from the superintendent. I think it's good to hear from people immediately supervising the superintendent, what's working, what's not. I think it creates a level of transparency and honesty and gives the board different perspectives. I also think it gives planned and meaningful opportunities for the immediate leadership team to be heard by the board in a way that will make them feel that the board is listening to them, and there's a check-in point, and the check-in point is very defined. The other piece is, which I think we're doing and we're getting up, is kind of non-leadership team, like Survey Monkey, where we send a survey out and we get comments back in.
Yeah.
And then the third piece, which I think is trickier, but which I still would like to do, is some sort of community input and parental input, which I think we'd have to take with a bit of grain of salt, because it's going to be probably the most self-selecting of the 3 processes. There's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to take the time for it. There are going to be people who are always going to take the time for it. But I think it's still valuable, and I think it's good to have the community given an opportunity. And then, use that information, look at the goals, look at the job description, look at the entry plan, and, sit down and just have a really constructive conversation, at the end of the year with the superintendent about how she's doing or how he's doing. And then we start the process over, and just make sure that, think about that as that and the budget being really the 2 most important things the board does.
Makes sense.
So, and then following up with that, we have Nancy Reed has volunteered to help at least get a process in place and get some of these things going over the next month or so, with volunteers from this board if they're willing. Nancy's on the other board. She'd be serving as a community member, which I think we could do. There's a little bit of awkwardness there. I don't know how people feel about it. The plus side is she's got the time and she has a strong education background. So I just wanted to throw that offer out there, get people's thoughts. Otherwise, one of us could step up and do that. I know session's over, Peter.
I mean, the committee would need a charge, and it would need to have defined membership and.
Exactly.
Right. Jim, do you know, I feel like at some point on the VSBA website, I've seen one of the services they provide is superintendent evaluation.
Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with them to see?
I've had some, and it's definitely something they'd be willing to help us on. So we can look to it quickly. Or I can look to it more. I do think I would like to at least be pretty, I don't want to say deep into the process, but I would like this to go hand in hand with the new superintendent hire. So it looks like, not that it just looks like, but it is that, with the new superintendent, we're going to bring a consistent process, and it's not going to come in
And realize
after she or he has been established for a while. So it's kind of like, whoa, wait a second, what is this? I want the expectation to be pretty clear that we're going to have
the entry plan.
we're going to have an entry plan. We're going to have a comprehensive evaluation process. We're going to stick to it. It's not about, we're not imposing something on you after you've been here a while. This is how we expect, our relationship to be.
Jim. Yeah. So having just heard about this, and this isn't against Nancy or anything, for some reason it's not clicking in my head that Nancy, it might seem weird to have someone from another board helping guide.
Yeah,
I just want a moment to think about it. Do we have to okay it now?
No, we definitely don't. I just
Okay,
wanted to throw it
so
out there. We can talk about
Can
it.
we have, before any action's taken,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to me, and it probably is okay, but it seems weird.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with it. I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to, Nancy volunteered, I wanted
Sure, and I
to throw it
appreciate
out
that.
there.
I appreciate that.
She brought it up, she says
Sure.
if the board feels it's weird,
Yep.
she's not
Okay,
gonna be,
yeah.
put
Well,
off
it
at
certainly
all.
needs people from this board on it anyway.
It definitely
right?
needs people
I
from this
mean, if
board.
we-
This
if
board,
we-
not,
Right.
This board.
This board,
Yeah.
yes, this board.
that's the difference.
This
Yeah.
board would need to create a charge and
Sure.
define the
Yes.
membership, and then if Nancy were to represent, to be on it as a community member.
You would be
Right.
willing to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
would we have community members on a superintendent evaluation committee is the question.
Well, I don't think it would be a superintendent evaluation, it would be a committee to set our process and help with some of these documents. And then
This would be, maybe this is a committee to help write this.
write the charge.
Then you would have another committee that would
Okay,
carry it out, which
So-
would be, consist of people on this board and no one else.
Yeah, or we could
Yeah.
skip that step altogether and just go straight to
Or the policy
superintendent
committee could
evaluation.
just work on this along with the
let's
other
just think about that for a
Yeah,
minute.
so I
That-
just
that's a
wanna
lot
throw
for
this
me.
out there.
Thank you, I
It's-
appreciate
it-
that.
This is ideas, but I do want us, as we move into June,
Right,
I mean, I'd like to have, this is not something I'd like to put off till like August or July, or, September. I'd like to
It
have,
starts 30 days in, if you're
Yeah.
gonna do it right.
yes.
If I can just say that, and like I just say, we're making this real complicated. When there are established procedures, proven procedures in place.
No,
We
I'm not
can
getting
get
home
started.
till 10 o'clock.
I wasn't sure what my.
You got it, is that right?
He meant-
Okay, so guys, we're having a lot of,
side conversations.
yeah, it's a good thing.
I was saying that there are established procedures in place to do a good job at this. We're making it really, really complicated when I don't think it really, really
Yeah.
is. And having a new person come into a position like this and getting them embedded, part of the team, part of the district, has to start immediately, actually. And when you bring someone on board like this, as you were calling it, the entry process, it's 30, 60, 90, then quarterly, then annual. I mean, almost like when you're a full year out, it's almost too late to do an evaluation. It needs to be a continuous
Yeah.
process. And I think we're making it really, really complicated when I'm not sure it should be.
Okay.
How
It's
would
just my
you
feedback.
propose we get there?
Well, we're handicapped that we have not done a good job of this so far.
Right.
Perhaps the BSBA actually has a process in place, or I have timelines in place for my own work. There are established procedures in how it is you bring on a new hospital administrator or a new
Right.
school superintendent. It's not like, we're not creating the wheel here, if I
Yeah.
could just put it that way.
We just, right, but we
So-
just haven't done it, so
And so we haven't done it, so
somehow
we are handicapped
somebody
by not
has to
having
do
it
it,
to
is
do
what
that.
we're saying.
I don't know why we can't adopt it from another school district that's already done it.
Right.
There has to be places out, I know, in a separate search I did, there are superintendent job descriptions out there that are easily brought in and as a draft and can be edited and updated. I mean,
Well,
And can the policy committee just, I mean, to me, when we were talking about it earlier, and Brian quite rightly observed that the budget process, the planning process, and the superintendent evaluation process are like our three
Yeah.
main
Mhm.
jobs, and they
Mhm.
kind of all
Although,
go together.
I think the policy committee's under a lot of
I
stress. Yeah.
know they are, but maybe they need more help or something, but that seems like, and maybe if Becky has resources at hand to offer them, that would help.
I think,
I can
I
help.
also think that Nancy had talked to Mike and several other people for samples of the process, so that I'm sure she'd be glad to give whoever's gonna look at it, so you don't start from zero.
Yeah, no, and I agree we don't start from zero, but,
Mm-hmm.
we need to have people that kind of come with ideas and
And
do
act
that
quickly.
research and come up, and
Mhm.
come up with that process and,
Yeah,
come
act
up with,
quickly.
with the job description, come up with the entry plan. I mean, I think it's all out there, but someone needs to
Or you like dropping
go
hints.
find it. No, I'm not trying to get, I'm just saying,
Isn't that something Mike's doing?
Maybe I was thinking about the fact, so now we're gonna meet again on the 23rd, because we love meeting so much.
yeah.
Mm.
And maybe if you think about all this, and on the 23rd, we develop a plan, whatever the
Yeah.
plan is, but we say, here's how we'll do it and here's who will do it. Because otherwise, you're gonna be into June and it won't have started.
Would it be easier to react to a proposal than it would be to draft it from straw man? I think so too. We need if I just put out there what I have to this board, then you can react to it, update it, fix it, correct it, delete it, whatever. But you actually have a tool at least to look at, if that would be helpful.
Would you have time, Becky, to check in with VSBA and ask them if they have a model?
I'd
And
be glad to.
you could compare their model with what you're used to working with,
I'd
and
be happy to.
that would be awesome.
You got it. Actually, I think I checked with it a while back, and they do have models on this, so I'll just pull it up and send it out. Okay.
Yeah, no, that would be super helpful. 'Cause
Okay. You got it.
So to be clear then, we're not forming any committees right now. The intention is in the future, we will have an evaluation committee. We're expecting on the 23rd, we're gonna have a rough draft of a,
Or at least some,
Something
What
to
I
work
would
with.
say
yeah,
is-
some
Something to
deeper
work
thoughts
with.
of hearings.
Or at least on the 23rd, just decide what
Something
you're
to
gonna
take home
do.
with us.
You know, your process, say, here, look at this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second that.
Already did.
questions here?
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
I'll take your blue sheet.